Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarian. Tēnā koutou ngā manuhiri, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei whare karakia o te atua, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. My name is Ruby Johnson and I will be leading the service today. We welcome you into this space made sacred by Auckland Unitarians for over 124 years. This includes those of you who are joining us online or who may be watching this at a later date. For those of you in the building with us, please join us after the service for morning tea. It is our sacrament of hospitality. Who's going to light the chalice? Who can I pick on? Mary, would you like to light the chalice? We light this chalice today as a beacon for all those who may be lost or stumbling amidst the endless journey that is life, for the strangers, the outcasts, and the misfits, reminding ourselves that we may find ourselves among their ranks more often than we care to admit. Today's service marks the first day of Auckland Pride Month for 2026. I talked at some length during last year's Pride service about the politics of Pride, and while I will not repeat that message here, I will touch upon the wider social context in which the queer community of Aotearoa finds itself at present. Last year it was clear that a reactionary political backlash was coming, and that has materialised in the last few months in the form of the coalition government's attempt to curtail healthcare for trans youth. We don't know yet what the result of this will be, as the decision is currently undergoing judicial review. However, I think there are reasons to be hopeful about the resilience of Aotearoa's queer community. Organisations advocating for access to reproductive healthcare, such as contraception and abortion, have recognised that this assault on trans rights sets a dangerous precedent for bodily autonomy more broadly, and are being vocal in their opposition to the government's agenda here. I recently found myself travelling around the country and was reasonably impressed by the visibility of queer activism throughout Aotearoa. I have to admit, I am a quintessential Jaffa, and as such, my view of the country comes through a somewhat tamaki chauvinist perspective. I've never set foot in the South Island until a little over a fortnight ago, but I'd always heard that things down there were a little more old-fashioned. I thought I might feel unwelcome, but this wasn't the case. Admittedly, I didn't stray much from the beaten path, sticking mostly to cities and the intervening tourist attractions. But still, I felt remarkably at home everywhere I went. And while nothing quite compares to the level of queer visibility in Auckland and Wellington, there were still signs of life down there. I was struck by the fact that the side of my hostel in Invercargill was plastered with pro-trans posters identical to the ones put up along Karangahape Road. While I do worry about creeping social polarisation and the influence of international lobbyists, I also don't think that Kiwis at large have much of an appetite for what groups like Destiny Church are trying to sell. We should never be naive by assuming that bad things can't happen here, but there's also no point being fatalistic. With all of that out of the way, I'm hoping to provide a service that tackles queerness somewhat differently. Queer stories are so often about a search for meaning, belonging, and hope. Rather than looking again at my community through the lens of a struggling minority, I want to be able to show that these elements of queer life are universal. To that end, I've included a reading by author John Green that does not address queerness directly, but which speaks deeply to a lot of the feelings I have about what it means to find hope and meaning when life seems to be set against you. Today's main talk will be a series of musings about journeys, travelling, and the difficulties of finding ourselves on life's path. Now will those who are willing please join me in reciting the covenant of our congregation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God. We pause at this time to honour the very personal joys and concerns of the congregation. You are invited to come forward and light a candle and share your joy or concern with us, or to simply come forward to light a candle in silence. If you are online, please use the raise hand function to let us know that you would like to speak. Today's selected reading is from the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. My children like to play an age-old game with me called Why. I'll tell them, for instance, that I need them to finish breakfast, and they'll say, why? And I'll say, so that you receive adequate nutrition and hydration. And they'll say, why? And I'll say, because as your parent, I feel obligated to protect your health. And they'll say, why? And I'll say, partly because I love you, and partly because of evolutionary imperatives baked into my biology. And they'll say, why? And I'll say, because the species wants to go on. And they'll say, why? And I'll pause for a long time before saying, I don't know. I guess I believe, in spite of it all, that the human enterprise has value. And then there will be a silence, a blessed and beautiful silence will spread across the breakfast table. I might even see a kid pick up a fork. And then, just as the silence seems ready to take off its coat and stay a while, one of my kids will say, why? When I was a teenager, I used the why game as a way of establishing that if you dig deep enough, there is no why. I reveled in nihilism. More than that, I liked being certain about it. Certain that everyone who believed life had inherent meaning was an idiot. Certain that meaning is just a lie we tell ourselves to survive the pain of meaninglessness. A while back, my brain started playing a game similar to the why game. This one is called What's Even the Point? There's an Edmund St. Vincent Millay poem that I've quoted in 2 of my novels and will now quote again here, because I've never come across anything that describes my depressive blizzards so perfectly. The chill is in the air, the poem begins, which the wise know well and have even learned to bear. This joy, I know, will soon be under snow. I'm in an airport in late 2018 when suddenly I feel that chill in the air. What's even the point? I'm about to fly to Milwaukee on a Tuesday afternoon, about to herd with other moderately intelligent apes into a tube that will spew a truly astonishing amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in order to transport us from one population center to a different population center. Nothing that anyone has to do in Milwaukee really matters, because nothing really matters. When my mind starts playing What's Even the Point, I can't find a point to making art, which is just using the finite resources of our planet to decorate. I can't find a point to planting gardens, which is just inefficiently creating food that will sustain our useless vessels for a little while longer. And I can't find a point to falling in love, which is just a desperate attempt to stave off the loneliness that you can never really solve for, because you are always alone, way down in the dark, which is you, as Robert Penn Warren put it. Except it's not a darkness. It's much worse than that. When my brain plays What's Even the Point, what actually descends upon me is a blizzard of blinding, frozen white light. Being in the dark doesn't hurt, but this does, like staring at the sun. That Malay poem refers to the eye's bright trouble. It seems to me that the bright trouble is the light you see the first time you open your eyes after birth, the light that makes you cry your first tears, the light that is your first fear. What's even the point? All this trial and travail for what will become nothing, and soon. Sitting in the airport, I'm disgusted by my excesses, my failures, my pathetic attempts to forge some meaning or hope from the materials of this meaningless world. I've been tricking myself, thinking there was some reason for all of it, thinking that consciousness was a miracle when it's really a burden, thinking that to be alive was a wondrous thing when it's really a terror. The plain fact, my brain tells me when I play this game, is that the universe doesn't care if I'm here. Night falls fast, Malay wrote. Today is in the past. The thing about this game is that once my brain starts playing it, I can't find a way to stop. Any earnest defense I try to mount is destroyed instantaneously by the searing white light. And I feel like the only way to survive life is to cultivate an ironic detachment from it. If I can't be happy, I at least want to be cool. When my brain is playing What's Even the Point, hope feels so flimsy and naive, especially in the face of the endless outrages and horrors of human life. What kind of mouth-breathing jackass looks at the state of human experience and responds with anything other than absolute despair? I stopped believing in the future. There's a character in Jacqueline Woodson's novel, If You Come Softly, who says he looks into the future and sees only this big blank space where I should be. When I think of the future, I start to only see the big blank space, the wireless bright terror. And for the present, it hurts. Everything hurts. The pain ripples beneath my skin, bone shocking. What's the point of all this pain and yearning? Why? Despair isn't very productive. That's the problem with it. Like a replicating virus, all despair can make is more of itself. If playing What's Even the Point made me a more committed advocate for justice or environmental protection, I'd be all for it. But the white light of despair instead renders me inert and apathetic. I struggle to do anything. It's hard to sleep, but it's also hard not to. I don't want to give in to despair. I don't want to take refuge in the detached ridicule of emotion. I don't want to be cool if cool means being cold to or distant from the reality of experience. Depression is exhausting. It gets old so fast, listening to the elaborate prose of your brain tell you that you're an idiot for even trying. When the game is being played, I feel certain that it will never end. But that is a lie, like most certainties. Now always feels infinite and never is. I was wrong about life's meaninglessness when I was a teenager, and I'm wrong about it now. The truth is far more complicated than mere hopelessness. So that's an excerpt from a chapter that I've had to cut short for time. But I think I've ended it in a fairly poignant place. It's hard to succinctly capture how I feel about this passage and how it relates to queerness. I think it has to do with the idea of looking inwards and asking why you are the way you are. It can be hard to own the way you feel about yourself and about what your values are deep down. It's easier to keep asking why, to keep rationalizing ourselves in a way that ultimately keeps us from living in the present. When we look at life as having a clear reason or end goal, we lose sight of how much the journey matters. Likewise, when we rush to put ourselves into a box to discover and define a finished version of ourselves, we lose sight of the fact that we are never really finished. Finding clear answers is always uncertain. Sometimes all we can do is keep asking better questions. Now we will have a music selection by Frank, who has chosen Wandering Travelers by Masao Aichi. Today's musing is called Queer Journeys. 2 days ago, I got back from a trip around Aotearoa. I'd been to a friend's wedding in New Plymouth the week before, and somewhere in the airport on the way back, the travel bug bit me. My family never traveled much. My parents were not particularly worldly people, and so I'd never been handed down an inclination to travel either. Yes, I've been to a few places in the North Island and Australia, but I've always viewed these as luxury excursions rather than an itch that needs to be scratched regularly. In short, I've always thought of holidays as a bothersome, expensive, and ultimately fleeting thing. Of course, this changed when I went to Rome about a year ago to cap off my degree. That trip broadened my horizons, got me out into the world, and gave me a lot of confidence. I had been planning a trip to go see a friend of mine who had moved down to Christchurch. By planning, I mean sitting around not actually getting anything done and watching the summer slip by with no actual travel plans in place. I'm starting a new job at the end of February, an opportunity that's both exciting and scary. I thought, great, I'm going to be sitting there on day one wondering where the hell my summer went and why they bothered to hire a person who can't organize a damn thing in their life. So sitting there a few days after returning from New Plymouth, I decided to stop thinking about planning and just leave. I packed my bag, booked an intercity bus to Taupo and a flight from Invercargill back to Tamaki for 3 weeks later. Hell or high water, I was doing this. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, so I took a copy of The Hobbit along with me to read on the journey. It seemed to fit the occasion, given that I was rapidly finding myself in the middle of an unexpected adventure. I was struck by how often Tolkien used the word queer. Queer was used as a slur throughout much of the 20th century before being reclaimed as a word with positive associations in recent decades, although there are still people here and there who don't like using it. While the word had already acquired a pejorative association with homosexual men by the end of the 19th century, Tolkien is clearly using the word in its original sense, meaning odd or peculiar. He's writing from the perspective of a very sheltered character who goes out into the world and encounters all kinds of situations and people that he finds a bit weird. Weird is another interesting word. We use this word now to mean strange or eerie, but it was originally connected to the idea of fate. The three witches in Shakespeare's Macbeth are called the Weird Sisters. The Weird Sisters are in turn based on the Moirai of Greek mythology, also known as the Three Fates, sisters who weave a tapestry that shows the ultimate destiny of every human life. I think that queer and weird are similar insofar as they both refer to things that are outside of our usual understanding, or disrupt the mundane pattern of day-to-day life. Think about the fateful stranger that we meet on a journey, someone with whom we might share an unexpected connection or who might change our perspective on life. I only had a vague idea of where I was going on my trip. I knew I wanted to get to Bluff. Sorry. That's how I feel about Bluff. My father was an English immigrant who had a huge chip on his shoulder about being moved to New Zealand as a small child. He once told me that we lived on a boil on the arse of the world. Of course, he never bothered going back to England as an adult, even to visit. I think he was more interested in being hard done by than he was in actually solving his problems. If I'm being honest with myself, I can relate to that. Anyway, I wanted to go to Bluff because it's the southernmost point of the South Island, somewhere that I've always imagined as a depressing, grey, frigid wasteland only one step removed from Antarctica. If there is a boil on the arse of the world, I've always imagined that it was in Bluff. To be quite frank with you, my grasp of the nation's geography has never been strong. I learned that Cape Reinga and Bluff were the northern and southernmost points, respectively, of mainland New Zealand from a jingle for Tuck's dog food that aired on television in the 1990s. So armed with that jingle and the desire to spite the memory of my father, I was pretty sure where I wanted to end up. I was excited to go on an adventure, but I was also nervous. I've never seen myself as a particularly courageous person, always neurotic and socially anxious. I like the positive attention that comes from cracking jokes, evidently. But I've never been comfortable with anything that would make too much of a spectacle of myself. You can imagine how hard this made it to transition. If you suddenly change sex in the middle of your 20s, people will notice. I've become acutely aware over the last couple of years just how much I've allowed being trans to limit my horizons, coming out really threw jet fuel on all of my insecurities. After all, you're not being paranoid if they really are out to get you. I think I transitioned with the best intentions of living a more empowered, authentic life, but my transness also became a place for me to hide, something for me to pin all of my hang-ups onto and say, look, this is why I can't have the things that I want. Sure, sometimes that's realistic. There are places in the world where it would be grossly unsafe or even illegal for me to travel, for example. But most of the times, the stakes are so much smaller. I worry so much about what people think of me, about whether my queerness is disruptive to other people's lives, about whether I'm a good person. I think that's another excuse. I can always wring my hands and say I'm just concerned with being an ethical human being as a way of totally abandoning myself in order to make everyone else happy. All of this is to say that I'm terrified of mundane bullshit like booking a room in a hostel and having to deal with a bunch of strangers. So with all this in mind, this trip was less of a relaxing holiday and more of a psychological death march. I tried to find every bit of me that was frightened and just dig my fingers around in there. I forced myself to stay in crowded hostels even when I had the money not to. I force myself to do the Tongariro crossing, even though I think of myself as unfit. I force myself to go to a haunted house, even though I'm frightened of being startled. I force myself to do a 60-meter free fall drop at the Shotover Canyon swing twice, even though I'm utterly terrified of heights. I looked at every activity that seemed like it was too much for me and just gave it a go. I spent a good amount of the last 3 weeks completely out of my comfort zone and struggling to keep my head above water, which is not to say I didn't have fun. On the last day in Queenstown, I went on a Lord of the Rings location tour where they let me dress up as Gandalf at the end and take cheesy photos. And I managed to get closure about my dad as well. Early on in the trip, I went to Turangi where he had lived and made peace with his death. It feels done now, at least as done as things like this can ever be. I made it to Bluff, and it was a lot nicer than I had imagined. Rather than a grey slab coated in seagull droppings, there's actually a beautiful restaurant overlooking lush native bush. I'm struggling to find a way to wrap this all up neatly for you. I don't want this to be a trite story about going out and finding yourself. I've spent a lot of time thinking about queerness by playing the why game, by asking why I am who I am, and offering excuses or apologies for that. I've always thought that I needed to find the perfect way to put it all into words before I started the journey to really accepting myself. But it doesn't work that way. You don't get to have the answers before you set out. You're going to have to get out of your comfort zone, put one foot in front of the other, and deal with situations that are outside of your frame of reference. Put simply, regardless of how normative your sexuality or gender are, from time to time, life is going to get a little bit queer. Mary, could you come forward to extinguish the chalice? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. I forgot to say, please repeat this with me, but you're all very well trained, so it's fine. And there's no discussion for today, so you're all dismissed from class.